The motion is approved.
Madam Speaker, next to be recognized is the lady from the 1st District of Bataan, the Representative Honorable Geraldine B. Roman.
Representative Geraldine Roman of the 1st District of Bataan is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise on a question of personal and collective privilege. I say personal, from the innermost recesses of my heart and my memory, because part of what I am about to share with the members of this august body and with our visitors in the galleries was written by my late father, Tony P. Roman Jr., a former member of this House and a friend to many of you. Tony Roman was the epitome of a macho politician with his iconic mustache and charming good looks. He is remembered as a legislator with a gift of eloquence and communication, as well as a much appreciated sense of humor expressed with his baritone voice. Former Congressman and now UN Ambassador Teddy Boy Locsin once described Tony Roman as a sharp lawmaker who drafted laws like an experienced surgeon cuts with a knife. But you know what? I remember him most not because of all of these wonderful traits, which make me very proud as a daughter. I remember him dearly because he was a father who loved, accepted, supported, and defended me, Geraldine Roman, his transgender daughter, with no question or condition whatsoever. In October 2013, shortly before the barangay elections of that year, as my mother and I were busy meeting with the barangay captains, I clearly recall how my father, then a frail shadow of the sturdy man that he used to be, because he had already lost 30 pounds of weight due to emphysema, how he called me out of that meeting and sat me down in a corner of our living room. He held my arm and said, "Jerry, I know you're going to make it as a congresswoman. How I pray I will still be around when you make it. But just in case, I want you to know that I dreamt of you last night, delivering your first privileged speech. I want you to remember what I am about to tell you." "Really, Daddy?" I asked him. "Did you really dream of me delivering my first privileged speech?" You know, my dear colleagues, to be honest, at that moment I had a gut feeling that all he wanted me to do was just to memorize his own thoughts, and that he was just using his so-called dream as an excuse to convince me to use his words when this time comes. "Yes, I dreamt it," he assured me. "Just remember these words." My dear colleagues, Madam Speaker, what I heard surprised me. Rather than a victorious speech with a legislative agenda meant to impress my future colleagues, what he was telling me basically constituted a plea. Instead of a triumphant discourse meant to shame potential detractors, my father's speech sounded more like an appeal for my colleagues to look beyond my gender and to accept me as an equal. It was an appeal meant for you, my dear colleagues in Congress, to overcome whatever biases and prejudices you may have and focus on what I have to offer. It was a humble plea for all of you to respect me if not for who I am, for who I represent. And these are the noble people of the 1st District of Bataan. The better part of me could not imagine saying these words of supplication. But I could understand where those words were coming from. Here was a father who was dying. He was not questioning my qualifications nor my ability to win. But he knew perfectly well that for me to be an effective lawmaker, I had to gain the respect of my colleagues. And my father, he was willing to beg for that respect, all for the sake of his transgender daughter. If my father could hear me now, I would tell him this: Daddy, you and I need not beg my colleagues for respect. I am glad and proud that the members of the 17th Congress have not only welcomed me with open arms, they have dealt with me as a full-fledged member and colleague, as an equal. Daddy, you would be glad to know that they have treated me with the dignity and respect that is due all human beings. For this, mga minamahal ko mga kasamahan sa Kongreso, maraming salamat po. Nais din ng LGBT community pasalamatan ang aking mga kasamahan sa Kongreso na lumagda bilang co-authors ng Anti-Discrimination Bill on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Nakikita niyo yung mga rosas sa mesa ninyo? Tanggapin po ninyo ang mga rosas na yan bilang simbolo ng pagkakaisa at pasasalamat. Kayo po, mga minamahal kong kasamahan, ang hashtag Equality Champions of the 17th Congress. Palakpakan po natin ang ating mga equality champions. Madam Speaker, my dear colleagues, I stand before you on a question of personal privilege, but I also speak to you on a matter of collective significance. I say collective because what I thought would be a victory for an ordinary politician like myself has instead been described as a turning point, a paradigm shift, a light at the end of the tunnel for a sector of society that has long been judged, marginalized, and neglected. As much as I would have wanted to focus my entire energy to serving the people of the 1st District of Bataan in the tradition of my father and my mother, I cannot turn my back at a group of people who have long suffered discrimination and have long been denied adequate legal protection. How can I turn my back? How can I turn a blind eye to the suffering that I myself have experienced at some point in my life? My dear colleagues, you know who I am talking about. We are your brothers. We are your sisters, your sons and daughters, your nieces and nephews. We are your family. We are your friends, your schoolmates, your colleagues at work, your Twitter and Facebook buddies, your neighbors. We are part of society. We laugh, we cry, we love and yearn to be loved. We are human beings. We love our families. We love our country. We are proud Filipinos who just happen to be LGBT. So the question is now, do we as members of the LGBT community share the same rights as all other citizens? Does the state grant us equal protection under our laws? An overview of legal references to the LGBT phenomenon shows that there are no direct references to lesbian, gay, transgender, and bisexual individuals. In fact, these terms are nowhere to be found in any of our existing laws, save for a few references to sexual orientation. It is clear, therefore, that this sector and its needs have been consistently overlooked. We lack psychosocial counselors equipped with the proper skills and training to respond to the needs of individuals with LGBT-related depression, anger, suicidal tendencies, and family relationship issues. There is no data concerning violations of labor standards involving LGBT employees. There is even confusion, even within the judiciary, with no less than the Supreme Court using LGBT and the term homosexual interchangeably in some of its decision, even if not all LGBT people are homosexuals. In our collective knowledge, the Philippines has had numerous incidents of hate crimes against the LGBT. Sadly, only 164 of these have been documented as cases since 1996, because there is no single officer or even a desk within the DOJ, the PNP, and the NBI that documents and monitors such hate crimes. And when in June of 2011, the Human Rights Council introduced a joint statement urging states to end violence, criminal sanctions, and related human rights violations based on sexual orientation and gender identity, our own permanent representative to the UN did not support it. That is our situation. My dear brothers and sisters in the LGBT community, I want you to know that I am but one voice among many in this august chamber that says it is time. It is time to pass the anti-discrimination bill on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And the time is now. Once passed, this measure will prohibit the following discriminatory acts. If an employer, whether from the private or public sector, includes sexual orientation or gender identity in the criteria for hiring, promotion, transfer, designation, work assignment, reassignment, dismissal, performance review, selection for training, in the computation of benefits, privileges, and allowances, that is discrimination. If a school or any educational or training institution refuses to admit a student or participant, or chooses to expel him or her solely on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, that is discrimination. If a school imposes disciplinary sanctions, penalties, restrictions, and requirements harsher than the usual that infringe on the rights of students on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, that is discrimination. When a student or trainee is harassed, punished, or restricted due to the sexual orientation or gender identity of his parents or legal guardians, that is discrimination. My dear colleagues, if this measure is passed, the Commission on Elections will have no right to prohibit the registration or revoke the accreditation of an LGBT organization based on sexual orientation, just like what they did to Ang Ladlad party list. Never again should such an outright rejection and blatant act of discrimination by a government agency based on sexual orientation and gender identity be permitted under our laws. The bill also underscores the right of every LGBT individual to have access or use of establishments, facilities, utilities, or services, including housing. Bakit naman kaya may mga restaurants at clubs na ayaw magpapasok ng transgender individuals? How different are we from your other patrons? Di ba nagbabayad din naman kami? Ipinagbabawal ng batas na ito ang mga ganitong uri ng diskriminasyon. What if a member of the PNP harasses a person because he or she is LGBT? Then the proposed law will make the officer accountable for his or her actions. Harassment occurs when a person is arrested or placed in custody and subjected to extortion, physical or verbal abuse because that person is gay and vulnerable. One cannot also force a person to undertake any medical or psychological examination to alter the person's sexual orientation or gender identity without the consent of the person involved, as if we are dealing with a disease that has to be cured. If that person is a minor and below the age of discernment, then the approval of the appropriate family court shall be required, and the Office of the Solicitor General can represent that child. Now the question is, now that we have identified the situations of discrimination, what will happen to those who violate the law? A jail term of not less than 1 year, but not more than 6 years awaits. Add to that a fine of not less than 100,000 pesos to a maximum of 500,000 pesos. In addition, the court may sentence the guilty party to community service and to undergo human rights education, including familiarization with and exposure to the plight of the victims. What else does this measure seek to accomplish? Under Section 7, the women's and children's desks now existing in all police stations shall also act on and attend to the complaints in cases covered by this act. Officers assigned to these desks shall undergo appropriate training with a human rights-based approach to include, among others, gender sensitivity, awareness and proper terminology, the dynamics of LGBT relationships, and the proper handling of hate crime investigations. Madam Speaker, my dear colleagues, nais ko lang sanang balikan at dugtungan ang naging panawagan ng aking yumaong ama sa inyo. Sana po, katulad ng inyong malugod na pagtanggap sa akin, ay tanggapin po ninyo ang pagiging pantay-pantay ng bawat Pilipino, LGBT man o hindi. I want to remind all of you here that recognizing our rights and dignity will no way diminish yours. We are not asking for extra rights or privileges. We simply ask for equality with inclusiveness and diversity. Our nation has so much to gain. And yet, sadly, previous attempts to pass this law have all failed. Madam Speaker, my dear colleagues, history awaits the time and the opportunity to pass the anti-discrimination bill on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity is now. Ako po si Geraldine Roman, anak ng magiting na lalawigan ng Bataan, transgender woman, mambabatas, Pilipino. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Representative Roman. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we recognize the lady from the Lone District of Dinagat Islands, the Honorable Kakabag-Aw, for her interpellation.
Congresswoman Bagao is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to ask if the representative from the 1st District of Bataan would yield to a few questions.
Is Representative Roman willing to entertain some questions?
I would be willing.
Please proceed, Congresswoman Bagao.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, before I interpellate the good Congresswoman from the 1st District of Bataan, Madam Speaker, I would like to tell her that long before she entered this chamber as a legislator,